PNC is proud to support the presentation of this City Club of Cleveland Friday Forum on WVIZ PBS.
Additional support comes from Cleveland State University. Support for closed caption transcripts of City Club forums is provided by the Nordson Corporation Foundation.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Hewitt Shaw and I'm the president of the City Club's Board of Directors. I'm pleased to introduce to you today today's speaker, Marion Blakely, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Aerospace Industries Association, the most authoritative and influential voice of the aerospace and defense industry, representing more than 150 leading manufacturers along with a supplier base of nearly 200 associate members, ranging from commercial aviation and avionics to manned and unmanned defense systems to space technologies and satellite communications. Before taking on her current role in 2007, she served a 5-year term as the administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, regulating the nation's highways and operating the world's largest air traffic control system and managing 44,000 employees and a $14 billion budget. During her tenure, the traveling public experienced the safest period for air travel in U.S. history, and the FAA launched the next generation air transportation system, the shift to a satellite-based system that modernized air transportation and decreased delays. Prior to serving at the FAA, Ms. Blakely served as chairperson of the National Transportation Safety Board. Ms. Blakely hails from Gadsden, Alabama, and is a graduate of the University of Virginia and attended the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies for Middle East Affairs, and, significantly, is a member of Phi Beta Kappa. Air travel and aerospace innovations have made our nation economically stronger and more secure and have provided Americans with unprecedented access to national and worldwide travel. But in these times of budget constraints, fiscal challenges, and limited resources, the question is whether the progress we have enjoyed over the past decades will continue to meet the demands of the future. We are honored to have Marion Blakely with us today to address that and other issues facing the aerospace industry. I am pleased to present, on behalf of the City Club of Cleveland, Marion Blakely, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Aerospace Industries Association.
Thank you, Hewitt. And what a delight it is to be back in Ohio, and specifically here in Cleveland. I must also say thanks to Jim Foster and the City Club for the opportunity to be with you today. It's very exciting, Jim, to be here in the midst of your 100th anniversary. That's a venerable history and something that I'm delighted actually to have been a bit of a part of. Maybe a few of you might have been here in 2006 when I had the privilege of speaking here when I was at the Federal Aviation Administration. And I'll tell you, I'm sure there are not that many people who have had the opportunity to be here at the City Club speaking first from the standpoint of the public sector and then from the standpoint of the private sector. So for me, that's a tremendous honor. And I also want to say thanks to our friends at the Ohio Aerospace Institute. Mike, when you're talking about the venerable history that we have in aviation here, I'll tell you, makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I think it's that exciting. I am here to talk about American aerospace and aviation, among the most important drivers of our economy. It's a foundation of our military strength, and it's really part of our social fabric, who we are, how we live our lives as well. Transportation has obviously always played an enormous role in America. The Erie Canal opened up what we then thought was the frontier. That was you, Ohio, the frontier at that point. 1825. The railroads took us from a collection of regional commerce centers to truly national commerce, a national economy. The cities exploded. fueled by a steady, reliable connection to goods, produce, livestock from distant factories and farms, a trend that went worldwide when container shipping really began in the 20th century, the second half. Most sweeping change of all, the interstate highways, binding every town and neighborhood and city together, freeing us from timetables and rigid tracks. We went from a nation of passengers to a nation of drivers in a generation. Now, some of you who have teenagers may not think that necessarily was, the march of progress, but believe me, things were never the same after that. I think that's part of why President Eisenhower is a hero to so many. Only part. Obviously, winning the war, saving the world for democracy, that certainly counts, as they say. But the highways are really central when you think about Eisenhower's public legacy. They built the America that we know today. When he was fighting, and he did have to fight to get the highways built, he put it this way, and I quote, "We're pushing ahead with a great road program, a road program that will take this nation out of its antiquated shackles. It will be a nation of great prosperity, but it will be more than that. It will be a nation that is going ahead every day. The expanding horizon is one that staggers the imagination." Now that's an image, a nation that's going ahead every day. And that's what I want to talk about today. For what the highways were to the 20th century, aerospace and aviation are in fact to this century. Now, in looking at that, of course, you have to say that she's coming from an industry with a pretty big stake in it, and yes, I am. The industry I represent, the aerospace and defense industry, is one of our most vital. Though we've been through recent tough times as an economy writ large, we have been an engine keeping the entire economy moving forward. We support over 3.5 million high-skill, high-quality jobs. 117,000 of them are right here in Ohio. This is well-paid work, the backbone of a strong middle class. It may surprise you to know that the average wages in Ohio in aerospace top $73,000 a year. That's average. Total industry payrolls in the state, about $2 billion a year. The industry as a whole pumps out $320 billion in sales each year, 2.25% of the U.S. GDP, and over $10 billion of that, Ohio sales right here. People worry about the trade deficit. Well, we don't have one in aerospace. In fact, this industry is America's leading export manufacturer, adding almost $90 billion a year to gross exports, and that therefore means right now we're talking about a $42 billion net trade balance. Really extraordinary, especially in these times. And it's an industry that I'm proud to say, Deloitte recently and others who've looked at us say, they punch above their weight. Yes, we do. We do it by innovating new technologies and spinning off vast new industries. Things like digital computers. I suspect a few people here know that the digital computer was originally invented to calculate artillery trajectories, and this is back in the early 1940s. GPS navigation, the internet, microwave ovens, CT scans, even the jaws of life that obviously are so helpful in accidents. All of these were born out of the aerospace and defense research and development. That spirit of innovation is alive and well right here in Ohio, home to two of our most important national research labs, Cleveland's own Glenn Research Center and Wright-Patterson's Air Force Research Lab in Dayton. From the pioneering work on drones and unmanned aircraft at Wright-Patterson, more on that in a minute, to the groundbreaking research that's going into ion propulsion systems to power the next generation of spacecraft underway at Glenn. Ohio is doing the hard work today that keeps us on the front lines of America's aerospace economy for tomorrow. And as with the canals, the railroads, the highways before, the impact of these technologies goes far beyond mere dollars and cents. It goes into our national soul. Presidential campaigns have used whistle-stop tours, but now, have you noticed? They're hanger stops, hitting as many as 3 to 4 states a day. When you look at the backdrop for so many of President Obama and Governor Romney's actual events, check it out. It's a hanger, and that's where they really are putting in a lot of time. Our children think nothing of moving to the farthest reaches of the country for school or work. After all, in today's America, they're never really more than a few hours away. And I think it's a daily miracle that we take for granted at times. You know, I just read about a ball player that was moving up from the minor leagues to the majors in San Francisco. It was his debut, and he only got the word like 24 hours. So he called his parents in Georgia, and of course, they said, "We'll be there. We have to." And he was so proud at the end of the game because he said, "They got online, got a flight, and they're here." Makes all the difference that we can do that. Highways let us go anywhere, but air travel lets us go any when. From the birth of our grandchildren to the Indians' next World Series game, and by the way, I'm rooting for that, but you can appreciate I'm rooting for it in Washington, D.C. Go Nets! It's important that you can be there today and you can be there when it's happening. The economic impact of this kind of change is really staggering. Right now, there are about 20,000 passenger aircraft in service worldwide. Boeing predicts that almost twice that number will enter service in the next 20 years. We're talking 34,000 new aircraft. It's huge. And fortunately, the best, cleanest, most fuel-efficient aircraft in the world, I believe, are the ones that America builds. Fuel efficiency of American jet engines has increased by 125% since 1960, 20% in the last 10 years, and safety margins, amazingly, have doubled since 1990. Consider the Boeing Dreamliner, the most advanced passenger plane in the world, and one that's powered by the Gen X engine that's manufactured right in designed in Avondale and is built by Ohio's GE Aviation. It's taking the market by storm. In my view, we're very well positioned to keep dominating this market, and Made in America will continue to be a hallmark of aviation and the aerospace industry. Cargo flights are also going to boom. By one estimate, they will more than triple in the next 20 years. 15 years ago, a Cincinnati banker told the Wall Street Journal, he said, "I can tell by the number of trucks on I-75 just how the economy is doing." Well, today, you'd probably be a lot better going down to Memphis and watching the FedEx jets take off. And I would also say that you could take a good look at what NetJets is doing, too, if you want to see how the economy is doing. Pretty impressive. Air freight. Air freight's just going to continue to grow in a culture that wants what it wants when it wants it. And that means a strong and vital U.S. aircraft manufacturing industry for years and years to come. Now, I understand that as much as air travel has become embedded in our daily lives, many of us really do have a love-hate relationship with flying. I get that. But remember this, we're coming out of a period of incredible turmoil and change in the airline industry. From deregulation back in 1978 to the recent waves of mergers and consolidations, and they're not over, to the fundamental system shock that was 9/11, our airlines have been playing catch-up for quite a while. And yeah, it's led to a lot of frustrations for us all. Security lines, I was in quite a one this morning. Take off your shoes, and oh, sorry, you're going to have to throw that bottle of water away. It's always the one I just bought. How is that? The last thing, of course, you think about before you get on the flight, until recently, was how are you going to get fed? But in fact, the end of the last free lunch most of us ever got is back there in the rearview mirror. And, of course, there's everyone's least favorite, bag fees. So I could go on about this. But I do see a light at the end of the tunnel on this stuff. I see a future where airline travel gets easier, more comfortable, and these kinks really do become a distant memory. We'll talk about them as sort of quaint annoyances that used to be back in the day. Because let's look at the trends. While there's no single way to measure this, air travel has undeniably grown more affordable in recent years. The term jet set doesn't even apply anymore. Online fare shoppers, Expedia, Kayak, they're what are really keeping the airfares quite low. Certainly, no one likes to pay to check a bag or to eat in flight, but I think there's another good way to look at this. People who'd rather not eat airplane food, and I can suspect there are a few of you right here in this audience today, it's never been known as great cuisine. People who don't have a bag to check, I didn't have one today, in and out. They're no longer forced to, in effect, pay for these things because they were embedded into the tickets. Fares aren't one size fits all anymore, they're a la carte. And in the end, that's going to make travel more affordable for us all. Security procedures are also improving, and I'd say improving pretty fast. From Love Field to LAX to Dulles Airport, my hometown, major renovations are underway to reorganize the way they're set up in terms of post-9/11 security. The more we build effective and efficient security into the airports, the fewer delays and hassles are going to be. TSA itself has been adapting and learning, getting better at balancing security with travelers' needs. Just this summer, in fact, TSA rolled out new procedures that ease the burden on travelers under 12 and over 75. And that's considerate when you think about it, allowing them to keep their shoes on, keep their jackets on, a few small things, but that matters. New trusted traveler and pre-screening programs are also going to simplify and speed up the security process for all of us. May sound like a small thing, but they just took liquid snow globes off the banned list last summer. Now, yes, one more American icon that's going to be able to fly free. That's all right. More seriously, the agency has listened to passenger concerns about privacy. When the new backscatter body scanners were rolled out, many were understandably concerned about the see-all pictures they seemed to produce. And the public was right to raise these kinds of questions and right to put the pressure on. But instead of simply digging in their heels, safety officials got to work. For a while, backscatter images were reviewed remotely to ensure that no passenger or anybody standing around got a peek. Wasn't enough. Now privacy is even more enhanced with new filters that really convert the images to stick figures. No more see-through images at all. Meanwhile, the airlines are listening to their passengers by quickly introducing in-flight internet, vast in-seat entertainment libraries, things that would have seemed really tough to imagine just a decade ago. Electrical outlets have arrived on some aircraft, and I have to tell you, I think in-flight cell service is not far behind. Now, that was pretty controversial when I was at the FAA. And, when they tell you got to turn it off, I think that still the pressures from the public are as much against it as they are for it. So I'll leave it to you to decide whether that's going to be a step forward or a step back. The biggest improvement in air travel coming down the pike, however, won't be on the planes at all, at least not exactly. It's going to be in the airspace all around us. It's called the Next Generation Air Transportation System. And I'm looking at a table of folks here, many of whom are intimately involved with it. Cleveland Hopkins, Ricky, I'll tell you, you all are on the front lines. In our business, we call it Next Gen. And it's the single most important thing our nation can do to make air travel quicker, safer, cleaner for decades to come. Today's air traffic control system is built on the same radar and radio technology that was constructed back in the 1950s, some cases 60s. Our planes still track, for the most part, ground stations that were built decades ago. They were put in place to follow the signal bonfires that in fact helped the airmail service back in the 20s get from point A to point B, still tracking a lot of those same routes. Obviously, not the most efficient way to get from point A to point B. The technology has been outdistanced for years. So, we desperately need the all-digital upgrade that NextGen represents that will replace the radar connections with essentially GPS. That's right. Same GPS you have on your car, most of you probably have in your phones. Our airlines don't. A Ford 150 can out-navigate a 747. And NextGen is going to fix all that. It'll mean our planes can fly closer together and allow us to easily route around bad weather. More efficient route mapping will save 3 billion, that's billion with a B, gallons of fuel each year, meaning cheaper and greener travel. And secure digital communications will make pilot control and miscommunication a thing of the past. Hear back, read back errors are still something that really do plague aviation because, you are not relying on the same kind of precision that you can in digital communications. Some important work is already underway. The FAA broke ground last year, in fact, on a next-gen ready tower that you all worked very hard to put in place here at Hopkins Airport. Once the system's up and running, the economic impact is going to be astronomical, like going from a horse and buggy to a tractor-trailer. Economists at Deloitte's firm found that NextGen will generate $29 billion a year in savings. That's reduced fuel usage, time saved. That's $29 billion each year from a program that's expected to cost the federal government less than $30 billion to put in place. That's for the whole darn thing. The other revolution that's almost at hand, and you all are really at the forefront of this, is in the unmanned flight area. Drones have already proven their mettle in military service, and we're on the cusp of a new age of unmanned aircraft right here at home. Early on, this will mean that law enforcement, emergency service, disaster relief, all will get the benefits. UAS, as they are more properly known, could be critical in searching for lost children, lost hikers, surveying and fighting fires like we're seeing out in Colorado right now, monitoring, providing relief, and hurricanes, tornadoes. But it's the broader economy where the possibilities are really exciting as well. Inspecting remote pipelines, bridges, spraying crops, commercial photography. Once you start going down the road of the commercial applications, it is truly exciting. But it's going to take a lot of work to get it right. There are legitimate, important questions about privacy and safety. There'll be difficult operational questions about airspace management and integration and other air traffic. It's critical that the FAA and other agencies of government move quickly to establish fair, practical rules of the road in this area. Now, another frontier, looking out further, it's space. And there's even more to be excited about. When I was here in 2006, I marveled that we had gone from Kitty Hawk to the Mojave Desert. Why Mojave? Because we had just seen the launch of Burt Rutan's Spaceship One, the world's first commercial suborbital flight. Well, that may have taken a century, but it only took 6 short years between Spaceship One and the SpaceX Dragon, which I bet everyone in the room saw that docking, either live or saw it repeated on TV, because it was the first commercial spacecraft to orbit the Earth and just this summer dock with the International Space Station. And the space scene has never buzzed with more big ideas. From AIA member SpaceX, their plans to start really regular resupply to the space station, to Virgin Galactic, which says it's going to be launching space tourism flights next year. And Sir Richard seems very serious about making that deadline. Meanwhile, as these commercial space companies grab a foothold in space near the Earth, NASA's pushing ahead with plans for deeper exploration of space. Its new heavy rocket, called the Space Launch System, is underway. It's getting ready to power our next mission to the asteroids, to Mars, or beyond. And if you all want to talk about that, I just spent 3 days with NASA reviewing plans, so it's an area that I'm deeply interested in as well. Because I know we're all going to be watching 10 days from now when Curiosity rover, the size of an SUV, attempts that oh-so-difficult landing on the surface of Mars. Wow. Well, that's the good news. And I think there's a lot of it, And if I were a more polite guest, I'd probably wrap it up right here. Move right on to your questions. But there's one more issue I need to discuss. Because all the things I just described, from our vital aerospace economy to the next-gen revolution, they're all under a deadly, dark storm cloud that's gathering back in Washington. It's called budget sequestration. That's the Washington term for over $1 trillion in automatic across-the-board budget cuts that are set to slash into our military, into our aerospace programs, into our space program, and really almost every operation of government come January. It's an aftershock from the failure of the debt subcommittee last fall. And unless Congress fixes it this year, these cuts will fall like a guillotine right on the neck of our nation's economic and military strength. You can look long and hard in Washington, and you're not going to find anybody these days who says this is a good idea. Mostly you hear words like catastrophic, devastating. The Deputy Secretary of Defense called it arbitrary and absurd. The Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan, known for their just the facts ma'am approach, says it would be like leaping off a fiscal cliff, landing us right back into another recession. And it's a steep cliff. According to Dr. Stephen Fuller, a noted economist at George Mason University, more than 2.14 Americans will lose their jobs. That's over 5 Clevelands. Nationwide, it would add 1.5% to the unemployment rate. Ohio stands to lose 40,400 jobs, $4 billion sucked out of the state GDP. That kind of economic devastation is bad enough, but the consequences to our military are even more frightening. DOD makes up less than 20% of the federal budget, but it would swallow fully half of the cuts. Secretary Panetta says these cuts would eliminate virtually every major modern weapons program. We would have the smallest and oldest Air Force and Navy since World War I. We've got tankers now that are flying that are more than 50 years old, twice the age of the pilots who fly them. How long are we going to hold out for replacements? Even seemingly impervious investments, like the highly affordable unmanned systems or mission-critical weather satellites, they're at risk because sequestration chops across the board. It hits everything, with no room for DOD to set priorities or make judgments, no room for anyone in the government to decide where to invest and where to cut. And it's not just the military strength that's at stake. American leadership in space is on the chopping block as well. Experts say the cut to NASA would be as deep as 9%. The next-gen modernization program I described could be slashed any more, if even more. 30, 50%? Depends. But it would be very tough to keep a program like that on track with any kind of reasonable horizon. Everyone understands the need to bring down our debt and our deficit. But everyone should equally understand that sequestration is an unacceptably reckless and counterproductive way to go about it. The clock is ticking on sequestration. Some of you may have seen this odd bit of jewelry I'm wearing. It's the sequestration countdown clock. And the reason I'm wearing it is that whenever I go up to Capitol Hill or meet with groups like this, I want to remind folks that the axe falls now in 158 days. So at the Aerospace Industries Association, we're doing everything we know to stop it. We've launched the most aggressive and ambitious public outreach and education effort in our history. It's called the Second to None campaign, because America does have to be second to none. I've been out sounding the alarm at events like this, urging folks to contact Congress and oppose the cuts. We have a one-click tool on our website that makes this a less than 5-minute job. So I hope that each of you will visit. It's www.secondtonone.org. Encourage your colleagues, co-workers, employees, please to do the same. We're working closely with many companies right here in Ohio, including our very good friends at the Aerospace at the Ohio Aerospace Institute. And they've really taken this fight on as their own, which I'm delighted to say makes a world of difference. But believe me, there's plenty of room on board this fight. So write your senators and your representatives. Please go to the website, secondtonone.org, with the word two, not the number. Or find your own way to reach out and make your voice heard on this important subject. I started out by quoting President Eisenhower, celebrating, as he said, a nation that's moving ahead every day. It's that same spirit that has led us at AIA to name our campaign Second to None. America's best days are most definitely ahead. And aerospace and aviation, they're going to be a big part of them. Thank you very much for letting me address you today.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday forum featuring Marion Blakely, President and CEO of Aerospace Industries Association. We will return to our speaker momentarily for our traditional City Club questions. We encourage you to formulate your questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief, to the point, and in the form of a question. We welcome all of you here today and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partners are WVIZ, PBS, IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC Bank. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. We welcome guests today at tables hosted by Baker Hostetler, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, and the Ohio Aerospace Institute. Thank you for your support. Now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is City Club Program Director Carrie Miller. May we have the first question? Ms. Blakely.
Ms. Blakey, I was very glad to hear you mention the time when President Eisenhower encouraged the interstate commerce, the interstate highway system. I happened to have been studying in Washington at the time, and I happened to have been in the gallery of the United States Senate when they were arguing that. In fact, I heard Senator Wayne Morse, whose daughter was in one of my classes, speaking about it. I learned very much later that they're the same stock as Samuel F. B. Morse, painter and telegraph. But my question is, where are we flying next? You know, at the beginning of the 20th century, nobody was flying. Where are we flying next?
Well, I can tell you where the growth markets are in terms of traffic on this globe, and then I can tell you what I think is going to come up in terms of actually space travel, because I really do believe we're going to see it quicker than most folks think. In terms of what's going on with air travel around the world right now, we're seeing increasing volume coming out of Asia, coming out of the Middle East, the growth of major new carriers there. When you look at who's buying all the aircraft right now, you see a lot of it from carriers like Emirates, for example, out of the UAE, just one example, but we could go on. India, now China, of course. And we're seeing others that are really fighting to become aerospace forces in terms of supplying those markets with aircraft and parts. We're also going to see more, certainly, in terms of Latin America. Brazil is becoming a major driver in terms of the economic thrust of this whole continent. So I think that what we're going to see, North America, South America, we're going to see a lot more traffic going up and down. And all of that will go to new and highly efficient aircraft. I think that traffic in this country is going to pick up. You know, we're doing all right now, but the recession didn't help things. But if you look back a few years ago, 2006, 2007, boy, we had a lot of congestion. And what I do give you all great credit for is planning ahead for when the traffic really does begin to hit those heights and what we think will be double the traffic by the time we get into the 2020s at that point. The fact that you all are going ahead, putting in a brand new tower, making plans for the kind of next-gen capabilities here, that's important. So where else are people going to be flying? I had a fascinating opportunity just a week or so ago at the Farnborough Air Show to spend a bit of time with Richard Branson and the new Virgin Galactic. Now, they've got 500 people who have put down up front $200,000. They call themselves private astronauts, and they're going to start flying next year. Now, this is suborbital flight. You get about 6 minutes of weightlessness. But the fact that there are a lot of people who are already interested in this, the price will come down. And the more it moves out of the realm of adventure sport and begins to be actually transportation, that's going to change things without a doubt. I don't think, many of us are ever going to see lots of traffic to deep space, don't misunderstand me. But in the area of suborbital, I think we're going to see a lot because it could be highly efficient.
Ms. Blakey, thank you for being here. And I wanted to ask you, you had commented on greener flights. What is your expanded view on the importance of sustainable and energy-efficient fuel for the aviation industry? Thank you.
Oh, it's a good question, Monica. Thank you. The expectation that we've had all along, and this is still significantly true, is that most of the advances we've made in terms of fuel efficiency have been driven by significantly propulsion technology, and the engine advances have been remarkable, as well as composites. Composites obviously give you a much lighter aircraft. All electric is what Boeing terms the Dreamliner. That means you're not dealing with heavy hydraulics. So there are a lot of changes in the airframe and in propulsion that have driven this. But boy, I'll tell you, what we really did not expect as an industry to see in such a go-ahead mode has been biofuels, alternative fuels. All of a sudden, they are really showing the promise of yielding tremendous advances in terms of sustainable, low-fuel flights. And this is a big thing because we're running scheduled air flights now on a 50-50 blend. Time's going to come when you're going to see that permeating the airspace, and I do think that that is going to be terrific because it does mean that you're driving down emissions. You're making a big difference in terms of air quality, and a lot of the sources of these fuels are very sustainable. Biomass is an example, where you're really not interfering either with feedstocks or interfering with trying to pull the kind of new crops that take a lot of water and take a lot of effort. So there's a lot out there that's exciting in that area. Thanks for asking.
Good afternoon. You didn't talk yet about the charter flights, which are really increasing. The third busiest airport in New York State is actually White Plains because of all the corporate jets in and out. In fact, there's one that goes for one of the companies in Rochester, New York, flies every hour. And the Canadian company, Canadair, that built it, checks out the plane every month just out of curiosity because there's no other plane that lands and takes off so frequently in their entire fleet.
No, I'll tell you, charter flights and corporate-owned jets, as well as services that provide various ways to share the costs among a group of organizations and people, all of that is moving right ahead. We suffered a little bit of a setback when we had the unfortunate discussion in Washington when some of our automobile executives were chastised for using corporate jets. Excuse me. And, there were some political statements, the president and otherwise, that really set us back. But you're dead right. That's a go-ahead area, and it's very important because it's a tremendous business tool. It goes to excellent efficiency. And believe me, the people who are sitting in these jets are not sitting in the back having champagne. They are a ton of hard-working people, often mid-level executives. When these things are used to full efficiency, it's remarkable what they add in terms of business productivity. So I'm glad you brought it up because it's an area that we think also the United States has a big advantage in some of the aircraft we make.
Ms. Blakey, thanks for an excellent presentation. When you flew into Cleveland, you may have noticed there are a lot of regional jets here. Do you foresee a future where U.S. companies get back into the regional jet market in terms of manufacturing them here in the United States?
It's a good question. You know, it's really a global industry, and you've got some pretty fierce competitors out there. Embraer, Bombardier, I look across the pond to Dassault and others. So it's an area that I'm not sure whether I see at this point that being a surge market for the United States. But we're seeing, you know, a lot of that gap gets pretty close to being closed between some of the aircraft Cessna manufacturers, for example, some of the aircraft that Boeing is looking at. So I'd say it's a space to watch.
Hi, getting back to sequestration.
Yep.
You said that we'd be hard put to find somebody who really wants to see these across-the-board cuts, and yet you seem concerned that they're going to happen. Who or what is standing in the way? Why is it, you know, why don't they just not happen if it's so if it's such a no-brainer? Be specific too.
I like the way you think. However, it's the law. I mean, that's what we're up against. This was one of those things that was just incredibly unfortunate. Rarely are good decisions made when someone is holding a gun to your head. And that's really what happened last summer. We were up against the debt ceiling and the debt. The United States credit rating was very much in danger at this point, and the Congress could not bring themselves to do what really is needed in this, and that is begin to develop to address the fundamentals. The fundamentals behind our debt and deficit lie in two arenas. One is in entitlements. Entitlement reform is very, very needed. We cannot keep spending the way we're spending and have Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security stay on track. And everyone knows this. But stepping up to that politically and coming up with something that's fair to people contemporaneously and makes it possible for this to work for future generations, our Congress has had a heck of a time being honest with themselves about that. The other is in tax reform. Certainly the revenues are going to have to match the spending. And those two areas are very complex and tough. But last summer, no one was willing to step up to it at all. So what they did is establish the, quote, super committee that was supposed to address this, supposed to come up with the combination of solutions that would work. And what they did was put a sword of Damocles in the law, and that is sequestration. If the super committee did not act, no choice, there would be cuts beginning at the beginning of 2013, January 2nd. And it's the law. It's very hard to repeal a law. And the same kind of issues are going on in the debate in Washington that were going on last summer. And that is, okay, are we going to address the fundamentals, or are we going to kick the can? We're going to try to put a patch on it. What's the right answer here? And of course now they're trying to figure out how to do that right before the election. Some say it's going to get resolved in the lame duck, you know, when people come back and there's less than 5 weeks before the Congress adjourns sine die. Again, very, very difficult to do, especially when you have questions, for example, like whether to renew the Bush tax cuts. What do you do about the debt ceiling, because it will have to be raised again? There are a whole lot of things that are really difficult that are going to have to be addressed then. And sequestration is a self-inflicted wound. It's a man-made crisis that was made, again, as a very, very poor policy last summer. But we're going to have to figure out how to roll it back one way or the other.
Ms. Blakely, during the last part of your talk today to this Cleveland City Club, you spent time in pointing out the efforts of President Obama to reduce significantly the budget for the military and for the organizations and companies which support the military. And yet, during the last few years, we've withdrawn completely from Iraq. We're in the process of withdrawing the sooner the better from Afghanistan. And I know you've been stressing the matter of jobs and pointing out that when we reduce the money for the military and for the industries that support it, we lose jobs. But to what extent do you really feel that the retention of jobs is more important than cutting the military and cutting the industrial complex down to where it should be?
Well, I think a couple of things have to be taken into account. The drawdown from Iraq and ultimately from Afghanistan will happen. And certainly that will cause lesser strains on the defense budget. But the fact of the matter is that cuts have already been put in place. If you followed what Secretary Gates did when he was in office, in point of fact, he did cut a number of significant programs. He also did a number of things to have the DoD become more efficient. He called it his efficiency initiative. And in fact, he did repurpose money as well as save money in the course of all that. What people are not taking account of is that last summer's Budget Control Act cut $487 billion off of the defense budget. Now that's done. Those cuts are going into place. So it's very important to recognize that the drawdown there is very real and it's happening. But even if you want to set aside the economic impact of sequestration, the loss of jobs, which frankly in this economy I don't think many people want to do, because these are good jobs, and this is a matter for something that will not even nick the debt or the deficit. You won't even be able to tell these cuts when you really look at the magnitude we have there. But it really will roll us back in terms of our economic progress and trying to get our economy back on track. But okay, we don't feel the jobs are that important. I can make the case entirely on the basis of our national security. Because when you get that right down to it, and look at our Constitution, the most fundamental thing that the Constitution spells out is to protect and defend, to provide for our national security. And what has kept us advantaged on the battlefield for a long time is the technologies that we field. What keeps our all-volunteer Army ahead of everyone else is the R&D, the investments, the technologies that we've been able to put out there. And I think it is absolutely critical that we not lose a step on that, because no one tells us that the threat has lessened. Yes, there have been cycles in the past, we could talk about after Vietnam, after Korea, when in fact the threat was less, but not now. And no one that is looking at foreign policy and national security policy sees that. The threats from both terrorism and newly rising states are very, very real, and we do have to protect our country. We also have to stand up. We are the world's superpower, and that does come with responsibilities. Like it or not, we are a great deal of what keeps stability in the world. And when we lose that, if we lost that, there is a tremendous cost involved in that. One final thing I'd point out when people are looking at the defense budget, I think it's important to recognize that we made a fundamental shift when we went from the draft to the all-volunteer Army. I think that was an excellent decision. It was a very sound decision. And we're very, very proud of very professional troops who do a marvelous job out there. But that comes with a cost. It is a much more expensive way to field an Army, a Navy, the Air Force, because you're dealing with people who certainly do have long-term careers, they have families, they're a different age cohort, and it has real obligations that we need to shoulder up to. But it is a fundamental shift. And when people say, oh, well, let's talk historically about the defense budget, you've got to factor that in as well. But more important than anything else, I would say, it is to maintain our technological edge and the role that we play in the world. There's no one else. You see, I do care about that just a little bit.
Thank you for your talk today. In light of the fact that I've heard estimates that we'll need 100,000 new pilots in the next decade, and that aerospace and aviation manufacturing is so critical to Cleveland and generally Ohio, can you comment about the state of education in these fields and maybe characterize, your feelings about it and what's working, what needs to be done to improve it.
Yeah, this is an area that I think is of real concern, increasing concern to a lot of us, because there are going to be good jobs in this area, and we do need to have the technical discipline in our workforce, the expertise that, again, we have certainly relied on, and this area has had a tremendous number of people who really did bring that to the forefront. What we're seeing, of course, unfortunately, is a real decline in terms of what are called the STEM disciplines: science, technology, engineering, and math. The United States is no longer graduating the number of engineers and scientists we need. Simply put, we're a long way from where we should be. We graduate about 70,000 a year, and only about 40,000 of those are really able to work in our industries, particularly our defense industry, because a lot of them go home. At this point, we have got a tremendous number of foreign nationals who are attracted to our universities, and that's great. But they are not going to be able to work, particularly in the defense industry, where security clearances and those kinds of things make it important to have homegrown talent. So yes, we need to be working in terms of all the way from the earliest grades right on through to develop and encourage the kind of academic discipline, the kind of focus and enthusiasm, extracurricular programs. I mean, I could tell you about some programs that I think are tremendously exciting and interesting that are going on out there. But they're all set up, and a lot of them are funded by our companies with an eye to encouraging kids to really look seriously at doing the coursework that it takes to then become an aeronautics engineer, scientist in the aviation fields, someone who can actually be a part of the space program going forward. As I say, there's a lot to be done there, and any of you all that are considering getting more involved in those kinds of programs, as well as, of course, encouraging the school system itself to really address this fundamentally. Boy, we need all the help we can get in that area.
Thank you very much, Ms. Blakey. Actually, he asked more or less my question. In my company's case here in Cleveland, we have a lot of jobs that are open right now, and because we have an aging workforce. I mean, a lot of baby boomers who are going to be retiring, and so we need, and it's not just the engineers, we need people on the shop floor that can run highly technical pieces of equipment, and it's a real challenge. Have you seen some places around the country where some innovative ideas are going on that we might be able to borrow from others?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that this is something that companies are struggling with really almost everywhere in the United States. I mean, and the good news is, again, these are good jobs. They are jobs that really do, I think, carry a excitement in many cases, a certain stardust quality to them. If we just make sure that people really know what it takes to do that. In terms of innovative programs, what we're seeing is that there is a big difference in the kind of expectations that younger people, the generations that are coming in now, have versus what we saw, frankly, 25, 30 years ago, which is the generation that a lot of the people in aerospace and defense are now. They're 50s, 60s, as much as potentially half of our workforce could be retirement eligible in about the next 5 years. So what you do see, though, is that the millenniums, the Generation X group, number one, they like to work in teams. They do not have the same kind of loyalty necessarily to one company all the way through. It was kind of the way a lot of folks grew up. But that's not necessarily the case. So we're going to see more mobility, and we're going to see more interest, therefore, in the kind of benefits and ability to move around that makes sense. But I do think, on the whole, there's no substitute for being an innovative force in the community and being someone that is going to attract people to, both the shop floor and the design teams and the groups that are really leading the companies ultimately. I wish I had some 3 or 4, great programs to point out, but I think a lot of people are working hard to address it. Maybe we'll try to circulate some best practices from that standpoint.
Ms. Blakey, one of the limitations of air travel is that you've got to drive out or be driven out to an airport and wait for half hour or more than that just to catch the airplane that you need. That's a similar limitation as in railroad traffic. Is there any increased use of helicopters to start and land more locally? You haven't mentioned very much about that. Would you address that, please?
Well, I'll tell you, helicopter technology, of course, is a tremendous asset in a lot of areas and fields. Obviously, in our military, it's been huge, and commercially, it's been enormously helpful. In terms of passenger traffic, unfortunately, it also, at this point, still carries with it a fair amount of noise. The environmental issues that go with that are such that, you know, it's often something that's very difficult to use as a way to get people from home to airport. And it's, you know, it certainly is for people who usually have more resources than the average air traveler. So I'm not sure that I do see that changing soon. If there's some breakthroughs in terms of noise, and, you know, again, cost factors are also important, that could make a difference. But it's tremendously important technology. There's no question about it. Let me mention one thing to your question, a little bit different take on it. The next generation air transportation system is built around the concept of 30 minutes from curb to gate. And that's something that's hard to do right now. The International Air Transport Association, excuse me, and this is the airlines, think you can do it at even less. And a lot of that is embedding all of the upfront stuff from the standpoint of check-in and security into the ticketing process, into the kind of data collection, into biometrics that, you know, we go through and put your thumb down and they know exactly who you are and you're onto the plane. So in terms of shortening time, there is a lot that's being done right now that really should contribute to that. I'm not sure, you know, I almost would bet more on the individual car plane. You know, there's several of those out there. There always are, but there are a few right now where you can roll it out of your driveway, put the wings down, and you're off. So I think that would be probably a bigger bet than helicopters coming, you know, right to your community near you.
Today at the City Club, we have been listening to a Friday forum featuring Marion Blakey, President and CEO of Aerospace Industries Association. Thank you, Ms. Blakey. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This program is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
PNC is proud to support the presentation of this City Club of Cleveland Friday Forum on WVIZ PBS.
Additional support comes from Cleveland State University. Support for closed caption transcripts of City Club forums is provided by the Nordson Corporation.